Hand-roasted politics, no sugar. International politics, just as you like. To the point. Without filter and no extras. And hopefully, well-tempered. And now, please welcome your host for today.
We will turn our eyes to Sudan today. It is roughly 600 days since the outbreak of the current fighting between the RSF and the SAF. And I guess we can fairly say the level of violence in Sudan is without precedent. All parties to the conflict commit crimes against humanity, mass killings, looting, torture, ethnic cleansing, sexual violence, forced recruitment of minors, entire villages burned down to the ground, targeted bombing of residential neighborhoods, and even enslavement. As if this would not be enough already, we see the international community looking at this conflict from the side, without the capacity or the political will to engage. So, what's really going on here? Let's try to look behind the curtain today. Let's try to shed some light on the driving dynamics of this conflict that does not seem to end very soon. Luckily, we have someone here today who is a real expert on the matter. It's Guma Kunda Gomey, former associate professor of political geography, peace and development studies at the University of Bari, former peace advisor to the Sudanese Prime Minister. Welcome to Studio Fritz.
Thank you so much for having me.
Tell me, how do you explain the level of violence to your kids?
I think that is the worst part of this war, that the two warring parties have actually reached a level where the killing became a norm. You know, they are now living with the status of killing on daily basis, and the blood and killing is no longer something which is exceptional to the human being. It became even a norm, and that is actually something we cannot understand what is behind it, but at least I would say that the two parties seem to have been using the killing and the atrocity in this scale as a way of winning the war, unfortunately.
Well, what you could read in the international media is that this crisis in Sudan is somewhat a forgotten crisis, or is it more neglected?
It is forgotten. It's neglected, and it's more. I will add that it is intended. It is forgotten because there is a lot of dynamics, global dynamics, regional dynamics, war in Ukraine, war in Gaza. They are also attracting the attention of some major actors to the case of Sudan. It is intended because the war initially is a Sudanese war with some external intervention, but today it has gained a kind of wide level of interventions, and its continuity is now to a large extent depending on not only on the Sudanese or internal actors, but even the international actors in the region and beyond.
But, well, tell me really what's going on there. There is no arms embargo for the entire Sudan. It's just for Darfur, as far as I learned. And there is no UN peacekeeping mission either. So,
even the arm embargo in Darfur, I think, is on paper, because there is no even impact of that embargo on Darfur. You know that. And I don't think the arm embargo is having any positive impact on Sudan or even on Darfur. Instead, the mobilization of the military resources by the both parties seem to be open and increasing day by day. So I don't think there is anything called embargo when it comes to the impact and effect in a positive term. You know that this war, as I mentioned, is that it has some very strong external interventions, and some of these interventions actors have their own interests in Sudan, competing with. Maybe we will come to this point, but I would like to say that arm embargo in Sudan has nothing to do with the impact and effectiveness.
So how come that international actors are so much meddling in this affair?
Because of, I will be very straight on this. It is very obvious now that when you look critically into the Sudan war and why how it started and why it started is something, but why it should continue unabated, that is another dimension. And if we look to the second part, why it continue unabated, it's very obvious that there is a number of factors at play. One is that the two parties are not actually putting the interests of the Sudanese people or Sudan at their agenda of fighting. We have seen the narrative of the both parties, and those narratives are a kind of unjustified justification of their continuity. We can, if we have time, we can actually challenge those narratives one by one. But let me say that the two narrative of the warring party has nothing to do with the Sudanese community and Sudan as a state. Instead, they are actually doing the opposite. That Sudan is now at the stake. Its disintegration is almost there. The life of the people and devastation of the infrastructure is there. So the internal dynamics by the two actors is not supporting the stopping the war. This is one. Externally, there is a competing interest, being economic, political, security, geopolitical or geostrategic interest. Those competing interests by different actors are actually impeding any viable solution finding. To make it worse, some of those competing actors, being states, are actually involved in mediation process. I'll be very clear here. So it's actually a dilemma that make the continuity very logical. So if we are actually wanted to find a solution to Sudan crisis, we need to look critically to those factors, external and internally.
So we just witnessed the U.S. presidential elections. Donald Trump will become the next president of the United States. Is that changing the dynamics with regards to Sudan in any way or not at all?
Of course, we have to wait and see the new administration, Trump 2. But at least from the Trump 1 reading, I am not seeing that any positive development can happen. But I know that in politics there is no mathematical equations, so anything can happen in the other direction. But I would say at this point the following. Reading from the previous term of Donald Trump, you recall that Africa was not on his table. You recall that during his first term, he called back the U.S. Army from Somalia. He pulled out from Somalia, and he was not interested. He pulled out the African, what they call the U.S. commander in Africa. I think it's called UNICOM. He pulled out the U.S. Army from Niger. He was actually moving to consolidate his internal gains at that time. And Sudan was not really at the top of his administration. Now, from his campaign agenda, it is obvious that it's likely that he will continue the same path. But the most worrying part is that during his first administration, General Burhan was one of his allies through Abraham Accord. And I'm quite sure that Abraham Accord will be on the top of his agenda. And in this case, if my reading is correct, this is not something good for Sudan. Because the military junta in Port Sudan will continue to be one of the allies. And I'm quite sure the Port Sudan government is now so willing to do everything possible in order to gain this kind of friendship. This is my reading. I may be wrong, but at least let us wait and see how things will actually evolve around. The last point is that U.S. allies in the Middle East are basically Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and these are some of the actors who are actually meddling in Sudanese politics in a negative way.
Well, calling for the United Nations or the US to do some mediation is always easy, right? But on the other hand, wouldn't that be a moment for the African Union to step up and say, okay, we take the lead here?
both organizations, I mean the UN and the African Union, these are entities formed and controlled by member states. So UN, as UN itself, can do nothing if the member states, especially the powerful ones, are not willing to do so. UN cannot do anything, neither the General Secretary or the UN Security Council. They can do little when the member of states are not willing to do so. The same thing applies to African Union. What I am seeing that, given the global dynamics and the regional dynamics I refer to now, the UN has very little to move positively toward the case of Sudan. You have seen the recent session on Sudan in UN Security Council, and they came out with almost nothing. In fact, they concluded that there is no way the UN can actually can intervene into Sudan case. So this is very, very clear. African Union is worse. The member states, I will just mention one thing. The African Union itself and its memberships are, even when they have a will, they have no resources. Leave alone when there is no will and there is no resources. I know that they are now doing some effort here and there, but at the end of the day, you don't see the result. Any process, any effort, at the end of the day, the bottom line is the impact. We are not seeing any impact of an effective solution finding in Sudan as we see at the moment.
So what do you think? The fighting will just go on for the next couple of years?
Let me just say that based on the Sudan previous wars, I just wanted to disappoint you and disappoint the audience that I believe that we are actually moving to 2 digits years of wars. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but we may even go beyond. Because if you remember, the first war continued for 17 years. When you look back to the reasons, even when the reasons are over, they pick up a new reason to allow the war to continue. And so I am not seeing any dynamics at the moment that will give me an impression that this war can stop at the moment, unless some sudden dynamics happen internally or externally. However, I am aware that the international community, the regional community at the level of African Union, IGAD, and neighboring countries are trying from time to time to do an effort to push towards stopping the war. But in the pragmatic thinking, I am seeing that this war is going to take some time, unfortunately.
Let's take a step back, maybe. Sudan seems to be a place where you can find a lot of superficial conflict management, meaning even when there is a struggle like the ones you just mentioned, and there will be an accord later on, these agreements seem to be broken right away. Is that particular for Sudan, or how do you see this matter?
Yes. Sudan has a very unique political trajectory. One of them is that there is no country now in the world, I would say, that has this number of peace agreements. No, none. In fact, even the second one, the difference between the first and the second, the number will be huge. Sudan has numerous, unaccountable number of peace agreements. The big ones and the micro ones, there are many. The result is the continuation of war since independence to the present day. Then the question is why? The reason is direct and clear. One is that there has always been lack of political will and commitment to those agreements, except in power sharing. Two, the nature of all those agreements, starting from Addis Ababa agreement going up to Juba peace agreement, they have common features, and all of them are not in favor of effectiveness and sustainability of peace. One of those features is that they are externally generated. Sometimes they are assigned under pressure, and therefore the signatories, the Sudanese signatory, the day they sign it, they start planning for how to avoid that signature, how to avoid those commitments. The second thing is that they are elites kind of deals. And the third one, all of them are power-based model, are based on power sharing model. And the power sharing model, meaning that they bring back the two warring parties into power, and therefore peace dividends, including transitional justice, cannot be attainable at all, because those who are on the list or to be like the perpetrators are the one who are ruling, and therefore there is no way you can implement any kind of peace dividend or accountability or anything. And because of that, peace agreement started to have a tension between peace itself and peace dividends, accountability, transitional justice, and other things. And because of that tension, the very peace agreement itself will prepare the ground for another war. This is exactly what happened throughout. Addis Ababa agreement came and has a short period of peace agreement. Then it prepared the ground for the second war in South Sudan. The comprehensive peace agreement that ended in 2005 was meant to, the catchy word was attractive unity. The result was attractive separation. So, and then it prepared the ground for a number of wars. In fact, when it was signed, the war was already in Darfur. And at the end of its implementation in 2005, South Sudan separated. The war started in Blue Nile and Nuba Mountain and Blue Nile. This Juba peace agreement now is part of the reason of this war. In fact, it's number one reason for this war. So the conclusion is that all the previous agreements have failed to provide any meaningful and effective peace dividend to the Sudanese people because of the nature and the way they are actually pursued and signed. And unless we avoid this in any upcoming peace process, I think business is as usual, unfortunately.
You mentioned transitional justice already. How could you think, I mean, if we want to turn the page one day and there will be some new institutional structure for the political environment in Sudan, how could you honestly think that the main actors who are in power today can be part of such a new chapter for the Sudanese history?
One, we have to, Sudanese people from now, unfortunately this is not happening, Sudanese people, including the political and civilian forces, unfortunately this is not happening because of the fragmentation, but there is no option. The option is for the Sudanese from now to start the process of owning the process of peace agreement. A peace agreement that they want. A peace agreement that will actually reconcile between peace agreement as a document and the implementation, including transitional justice. That peace agreement, one of its key features is that it shouldn't bring back those who are supposed to be in the court back into power. Because this is exactly what actually impede the implementation of transitional justice. When you have those who are on the list or potential leaders who are supposed to be questioned, be subjected to accountability, they are sitting on the power and you expect them to move the file of the transitional justice. That's not going to happen. And this is exactly what has been happening throughout the peace agreement. So back to your question, if we want to secure a peace agreement that will allow the implementation of transitional justice with all its components, whether it is accountability, reconciliation, forgiveness, fact findings, telling the truth, and all that, with all those components, you need to design a peace agreement which is owned by the people, so that at the end of the day you have a government that can actually create an institutions that can actually control the process of implementation of peace agreement, including legal and constitutional reforms, because you know that, for example, the most serious crisis or crime committed by the two parties now, most of them amounted to the crime against humanity and war crimes. those crimes, Sudan is not a signatory to Roma statute. So if you wanted to move this transitional justice, you have to move the country to be a signatory, so that the power of this court can be actually leading this process of those kind of war crime. So I think we have a long way to go. Unfortunately, at the moment as I speak, I think that the ownership of the process is not at the hand of the Sudanese. The Sudanese themselves are not united with a minimum common agenda to set the path for controlling the future affairs. And until that happens, then we can actually start thinking about a peace agreement that can ensure transitional justice in Sudan.
What is your read on the Taqadum initiative in this regard?
Taqadum is in principle, is one of the most viable civilian movement at the moment. But it has not yet done enough to win, not to win, but to expand its movement on the ground and to be supported and owned by the grassroots. It has not done enough, despite the effort they have done. I know also the limitations, including the security, the way you want it to work on the ground, because if you are talking about be grounded in community base, you have to work inside the community all over the Sudan. You know the situation now, territorially, who is controlling what, and therefore the ownership process at the grassroots have some logical and some reasonable explanation. But those reasons and explanations are not sufficient to the performer of Taqadum today. The second point is that there are a lot of forces, civilian and political forces, who are not part of the Taqadum, and they are not also moving to provide an alternative. If Taqadum is doing little, then we should also have a kind of other movement who are criticizing Taqadum. They are supposed to move and take the lead and provide an alternative, viable alternative. The point is that they are not doing that, and they're criticizing Taqadum, and the whole civil society is actually impeded by this fragmentation and tension with no productive kind of alternative options. This is very unfortunate.
So you say the critics towards Taqadum initiative are justified?
I think they are justified. They are justified to a certain extent, but there are also critiques that are just for winning political marks from the other side of the political spectrum. So I would like to say that in Sudan, I strongly believe that Sudan is at the moment is lacking, well, not lacking, but it is suffering from, I would say, political leadership deficit. I would say that, because this is the moment where a leader should emerge. This is a peak of crisis in the country, and this is the environment that will actually allow for an emergence of a leader, charismatic leader who can actually pull the country outside. When I look around, I don't feel like there's something there on the until that happen, and until that happen, I think Sudan will continue to suffer because of the leadership in the political and civilian front. I'm not saying that there's no Sudanese who are capable. I'm saying there is no leader who has emerged and took up the responsibility, including the political risk, but because the most important issues which are supposed to move Sudan forward are avoided by most of political leaders. And that's why I'm saying there is a political leadership deficit. We need to put the issue of transitional justice on the table. We need to put the issue of, when we say exclusion and exclusion of NCP, for example, what do we mean? We need to put it on the table. Those issues are being avoided by political leadership because they are very expensive, politically speaking. You know that the street and the youth are saying, for example, al-qasas. That means we need to revenge for our martyrs. And then the politicians are not willing to say something different out of that because they are afraid of that. And I think this will not take Sudan anywhere. We need to have a civilian leadership, political leadership, even Taqadum, to stood up and take those very hot issues and bear the responsibility, including the risk that may entail. But nobody is doing that.
Okay, I understood the lack of civilian leadership in Sudan right now, but still, if you take a step back in 2018 and 19, when the regime of al-Bashir fell, there was a wave of positive energy coming from the civil society at the time, asking for change for Sudan. Why isn't that possible today?
Because exactly the way the revolution started, it wasn't a political movement. It wasn't a political initiative. It was a grassroots youth-led revolution. Let's be very clear here. The political leadership came later to own the process and to be allowed by the youth to lead the process. And when they actually led the process, we started to see those problems that actually led to the fragmentation to the present day. So those days, 2018, the civilian space, let me say the civilian activism was to a large extent united. You can look now at the present now, you can look in the political space and see those who were part of the FFC at the time, even the youth, when we used to go to the demonstrations, at the beginning, you don't know who is calling for the demonstration. You don't see him. And some of those people who were behind and organizing the demonstration, they were not seen. So the people were united without questioning who is that and who is he and from where he is coming. Today, that energy is no longer there. It has been shattered, it has been fragmented, and even it became worsened by the disruption of the war, which has actually even divided people further along ethnic line, along regional line, along classes, along, you name them, along military and all that. That has go deep, even fragmenting the youth along their different spectrum. So today's situation is completely helpless, but I have not lost the trust on the Sudanese youth and the Sudanese people at large. I still believe that what happened in 2018 can be repeated with a stronger energy, but that need, first of all, to have a kind of unifying factors. And here back, I will go back to leadership again, whether youth leadership or leadership from the old generation.
We have to conclude, unfortunately, very soon. So maybe a last question. What are the three things that have to happen in order to solve the Sudan crisis?
Number one, I think the civilian leadership, the civilian component, they need to start a strategic kind of negotiations with different regional actors. And here I'm talking about especially the neighboring countries. I'm talking about Egypt, I'm talking about Saudi Arabia, I'm talking about Emirates, I'm talking about Chad, I'm talking about South Sudan, I'm talking about Kenya, Ethiopia. They need, because there is a competing interest of all these neighboring countries. And you know, in international relation, interest matters. That's the bottom line of the relations. So Sudan, the civilian component need to address the concerns of those regional actors. At the moment, the interest of Sudan is not on board by those actors. But it's not on board because the Sudanese themselves are not negotiating seriously on those issues. I think there is one thing to happen is that civilian component, which I see them as a potential government in shadow. So if we are talking about the new transition, if you are talking about negotiated solution, the theory is that a new civilian-led government will come up. Unless you address the interest of those different countries, I don't think you will have a stabilized civilian-led government. So my first point is that the civilian groups, including Taqaddum, should start, and this is one of the issues that I say we need leadership. They need to start negotiating with those governments and reach a kind of an equation that is about win-win equation in terms of interest of Sudan and interest of those countries. And also to make a message clear that your interest can still be gained without war in a peaceful government. If you address those, you could actually mobilize these regional countries to be more pushing towards a peaceful Sudan, without doing this, they will continue to hunt on their interests, irrespective of what's happening in Sudan. This is very important point. Number one. The second point is the civilian unification. Not unification in a sense that they come together under one umbrella, but they should have a minimum national agenda in the area of peace, the strategy, what type of peace they wanted to see, and they also should mobilize the people to own the process from the beginning. And when they do this, I think the international community can listen to this. The final point is about continue pushing to the current efforts, which is by African Union, by IGAD, by UN, and the mediation, the ALPS group. I think the most important point here is that coordination and collaboration to happen in order to have a unified effort once and for all.
Thank you very much, Guma Kunda Gomey, for your insights and your analysis of the Sudan crisis. Obviously, we will follow up on this very soon. Thank you very much for coming, and I hope to see you soon again.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Hand-Roasted Politics, No Sugar is a Studio Fritz production for the German Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung.